Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Matt Storrs, and welcome to Mattsplaining. On today's episode, I have an expert on who is going to talk about their area of expertise, and I'm very excited to talk to them. Expert, please introduce yourself and tell us what you're an expert in.
My name is Stephen Aleck. I live in Los Angeles. I'm a video editor, and I am an expert in Warhammer 40,000. I've been playing, collecting, painting, reading the books for 26 years at this point, and it's something that's part of my everyday life.
That's fantastic. My understanding of Warhammer is that it is a game, as you mentioned, and that it has been around for quite some time. My understanding is that it kind of originated in the 80s, and like many hobbies, it's tied to a sense of nostalgia today. They've built out the brand and everything in a lot of different ways, but it's this game that's based on like a space future setting with some mystical elements as well.
Yeah.
The big focus of it is that the figurines themselves, and the idea that these figurines harken back to the figurines of yesteryear in the 50s and 60s, even the 40s, when there were metal shortages. So the metals that were used may not have been up to the standard that you wanted them to be. So you have like the traditional way of these lead alloys and the ones that are coated in lead-based paint. And so that's why you see so many people painting their Warhammer figurines. It's to get into that nostalgia of covering up that leaded metal, that leaded paint of those yesteryears to make them safe to play with. I don't know if you've ever, like for instance, when I was young, I had a set of knights that were really, really cool. But anytime that I tried to play with them, my parents were like, hey, don't put those near your mouth, wash your hands after you play with them. And I'm like, why? And they're like, oh, because they have lead in it. I'm like, why are you letting me play with these? But I'm like, I love knights. And we could have very easily just painted them. We did have access to painting kits at the time, but I don't know exactly why, but it's that same sort of nostalgia of like, this is the way it was always done. And these are the toys that are meant to be played and set up on these large, elaborate tables. Another important thing is the tables themselves.
Yes.
A lot of people don't realize this, but if it wasn't for Warhammer's popularity in building after years, there was a lot of carpentry and carpentry businesses that would have gone out of business. And they had these opportunities to get into the very traditional carpenters saying, I just want to make the tables that I want to make. But these young upstarts are like, hey, if we get into the subset of these games, we can make these like really elaborate, ornate tables and really like carve out our niche. And that's saved a number of businesses from going under. Okay. And there's been a number of spinoffs of it very recently, maybe not recently, but there's a little bit more fantasy based ones. There's ones that are, still in space. There's a space opera one where you're meant to sing as you're playing and like dictate like how your figurines are interacting with the aliens and the mystery and everything like that, but like very operatic. And they've actually tried to option it.
That does sound like a lot of fun.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It's something that they had a lot of trouble building out because the games can last for so long that people's voices were dying out. So you needed to have,
right there.
Yeah, have a lot of instances of like people giving out and like you need to hire a Warhammer voice coach to be able to like really sustain an effective game if you're going to do the singing based one.
That's a new one on me.
Okay. And then with Henry Cavill, very famously, is a big proponent, big fan of the game.
That is true.
And he's living his best life. He's just, gotten the rights, as I understand it, to bring the game to the Amazon Studios or one of these.
Correct, and very exciting.
And I think that that's going to be really amazing because like it's demonstrating that no matter how handsome somebody is, they're going to have special interests. And that is one of the most beautiful things in the world, because like there's this predisposition, if somebody is attractive, like they're it's only surface level, but like you look into it and you're like, oh yeah, they do have special interests. They're a whole human being. And that's really a window into that of like all of these people that were like, oh yeah, he's so dedicated to The Witcher and everything like that. And like that's so amazing. And then it's like, oh no, it goes even deeper. He has all these special interests and he can be so focused. And that's the dream for anybody that has a special interest and they might feel uncomfortable about. It's, oh, no, like that very attractive man that is everybody's looking at, he's got special interests. I can have my special interests and I can enjoy myself. And I think that that's going to do a lot of good for society.
Yes,
Yeah.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that.
Excellent. So based on what you've heard so far, about how much of that would you say was accurate?
You know what? I would honestly say like 60-70%. You're not wrong about a lot of it.
So it is based on lead-based metals and
no, not that part.
okay.
So early on, the figurines were made out of pewter.
Okay.
And sometimes you'd get some lead in the pewter. And I remember when I got my first ever figurine, the person who gave it to me specifically said, there might be lead in it, so don't put it in your mouth.
Mm.
That said, the paint, not lead. It's just a standard acrylic. You were half right about the fantasy elements. Actually, Warhammer Fantasy came first.
I see. Okay.
Warhammer Fantasy started in 1984. Warhammer 40,000 started in 1987.
I see. Okay.
But you were correct about it being in the future, and there are mystical elements. Mm-hmm. They essentially have space wizards. They call them psychers, who have magic that is they call it psychana, but really it's functionally magic.
Okay. It's space magic.
It's space magic. Okay. It is space magic. And there's a lot of mumbo jumbo about sort of how it comes from a subspace dimension called the warp. And the warp is sort of a reality next to our reality that's full of what's called chaos. And chaos it's meant to be evil, but it's not really evil. It's just this uncontrollable force that presents itself to us as evil. Very, very much like Event Horizon, if you've ever seen that movie.
Okay, yeah, I have seen Event Horizon a number of times.
Yeah. So the warp in Warhammer 40,000 is not unlike subspace in Event Horizon.
The subspace hell of Event Horizon.
Yes.
Okay. Icky.
It's real icky. It gets gross.
Okay. So is it very heavily kind of demonic in the inspiration, or is it more okay?
Yes, there are creatures that come out of the warp that are literally demons.
I see. Okay. And this might be getting us into a kind of a deep hole, but like what caused the demons to come out? Is it the space magic itself, like somebody was playing around with the wrong type of magic, or
that is actually a fantastic rabbit hole to go down to. So within Warhammer 40,000, this subspace dimension that's called the warp. The warp is very much inspired by this author named Michael Moorcock, who was a fantasy writer in the 60s and 70s, wrote this book called The Eternal Champion. But the idea is that the warp is a reflection of our reality. Okay. So the more violent and greedy and let's say lascivious and deceitful we are, the more the warp becomes those things. Because the warp is sort of like a reflection of humanity's emotional energy. Okay. So there are 4 chaos gods, which is the god of plague. Okay. Horn, which is the god of war and violence. Tzeentch, which is the god of change and deceit and lying. And Slaanesh, which is the god of pleasure. And it's kind of up for debate as to whether they are sentient beings, but the more we become those things, the stronger they get. Okay. And over time, humanity developed the ability to, first off, to break into and travel through the warp as a means of faster than light travel. But we also created psychers called astropaths. And astropaths are very much, the idea of an astropath is very much cribbed from the pilot guild from Dune. In fact, a lot of Warhammer 40,000 is cribbed from Dune. Okay. It's the idea that they can see into and travel through on a spaceship this dimension that's next to us, but that dimension can, using an untrained psyker or a psyker who is not disciplined, break through into our reality and literally cause hell.
Oh wow, that's This all sounds very intense to me.
It is so intense. It's very Lovecraft inspired, actually, in a lot of ways.
That makes a lot of sense. What got you first into it?
The first thing that got me into it was honestly just how cool the figurines looked.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was 1997 or 1998. I bought my first set, and I just thought the Space Marines looked just cool as all hell. I mean, and they do look cool.
Mm-hmm.
Their suits of armor's patently, like, I look at them now and I'm like, oh, that's ridiculous. It's not functional. But they look awesome. I mean, they're these 8-foot tall, 2,000-pound demigods who carry machine guns that fire grenade launchers. What 16-year-old doesn't think that's the coolest thing ever?
Right.
But then I sort of stayed with it because it was the lore and the backstories was this fantastic synthesis of all these other authors that I loved. I mean, there's J.R.R. Tolkien, there's
Mm-hmm.
Frank Herbert, there's H.P. Lovecraft, there's John Milton.
Mm-hmm.
Is
there any Heinlein in there?
Oh, there's definitely Heinlein.
Yeah, because I remember seeing the cover of Moon is a Harsh Mistress, I want to say, or Starship Troopers, and they had similar suits in the art design to what I associate with Warhammer.
Oh, definitely. I definitely think that Starship Troopers was a bit of an influence.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the bugs could be an influence on what's called the Tyranids within Warhammer 40,000. The only difference is that Heinlein politically would never align with Warhammer 40,000.
Okay. What is the political viewpoint on that?
So the government within Warhammer 40,000 is called the Imperium, and it is a theocratic fascist regime.
Okay.
The idea is that it's the worst possible time to be alive.
Okay.
So if you ever see some alt-right conservative waving a Warhammer 40,000 something, just remind yourself that Warhammer 40,000 is supposed to be like 1984. It's supposed to be awful. That's the whole point. Whereas Heinlein was a hardcore libertarian.
Mm-hmm.
So the stuff that he created in his books was actually supposed to be aspirational. Like he wanted a military that was like the military in the book Starship Troopers. I find Starship Troopers to actually be a really problematic book.
Oh yeah, it's extremely problematic.
And I love the movie because the movie makes fun of the book.
Right.
And I love it. It satirizes the book. And Warhammer 40,000 started out as satire. It's less of that so now, but when it first started, it was very much a satire.
What exactly was it generally satirizing, like the military-industrial complex as a whole?
It was the military-industrial complex as a whole and what was going on in Britain at the time.
I see.
It was created by a guy named Rick Priestley in the 80s, and all the guys that created it were art history nerds, working class from Nottingham, England. And they were, there are lots of references in the early books to punk bands, to heavy metal that was going on. There's actually a debatable factoid that one of the orc warlords was named not so secretly after Margaret Thatcher.
Okay.
And when confronted about it, they denied it, but they still referred to Margaret Thatcher as the old witch. Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand then, especially during that time period, wanting to do that.
Yeah, it was a hard pushback. And also it was very much in line with 2000 AD and Judge Dredd, which was another game that they were working on at the time. And if you've ever read Judge Dredd, the comic books, that's very much a satire about American law enforcement.
Right.
So yeah, no, it's this idea of like, this is what happens when the guardrails come off completely and you just let the worst aspects of yourself control everything.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like it's extremely deep and vast in terms of how you can get into it and how much you can build up these stories and these situations with this world.
Oh God, there's literally hundreds of novels, there's video games, there's more than you can possibly absorb.
That's wild.
In terms of its depth and story, I would say Star Wars is probably the only universe that has more.
Okay.
And maybe not even that.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stephen, this has been so insightful. If people want to learn more about you or wanted to learn more about Warhammer, where would you recommend that they look? I
would say look at me. I'm at Stephen_Aleck on Instagram and at aleckrafts on Instagram. That's where I put up paintings of my figurines.
Excellent.
And if you want to check out Warhammer, I would say just look up warhammer.com, but really what I would say is there's a series of books called the Eisenhorn Trilogy, and I will send a link to that, but they're 3 books set in the Warhammer universe that explain everything.
Okay.
And they're beautifully written.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you so much. I think that's going to be really helpful for folks.
Of course, man. Thank you for letting me talk about this thing that I absolutely love.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I had a great time. I feel like I learned quite a bit.
Thank you. Glad I could impart just a little bit of knowledge. This is a thing I talk about with my friends on Instagram constantly, and when I talk to people outside of this world about it, they stare at me like I'm, it sounds like I'm talking about Scientology or something.
Right. Yeah, well, I think you did a great job. I usually, when I hear about Scientology stuff, I start getting kind of tight and my back feels tight. I feel very relaxed and very like, oh yeah, I wonder if I can get these books on Libby,
You probably can.
Yeah. Very cool. Excellent.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. My name is Matt Storrs, and this has been Mattsplaining.